50 years ago today, 4 days after the assassination, Americans were still in shock. We were all connected to each other by the experience of watching the burial of John F. Kennedy on television, most cases small black and white televisions. NBC News White House correspondent Andrea Vanocur filed this report from the White House lawn on that morning 50 years ago today.
In the afternoon, Mrs. Kennedy is going to return to the White House, and here she will receive the heads of state and the heads of delegations who have come to the funeral of her husband. There's just one other thing that should be said today. This is her son, John Jr.'s 3rd birthday. This is Andrea Vanocur, NBC News at the White House.
And I'm joined now by Andrea Vanocur and NBC presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Welcome both. Sandy, good to see you coming to us from Santa Barbara. Tell me about the coverage of the funeral and the sense that we all had of the country coming together in grief through television. It was the first real moment like that with the new technology, or the rather recent technology of television coming to its own.
You've put your finger on what was new and different was television, and it was seen by many, many millions of Americans, and I think it bound the nation together as they watched the funeral service, Mrs. Kennedy and her 2 children, because after all, the president, his wife, and his 2 children were newcomers into the age of television, but they created a new age in television when people watched events as they occurred, not delayed, but as they occurred.
And Michael Beschloss, we now remember these images so vividly. That day, it was all live. We were watching the casket first. It was taken on Sunday to the rotunda, and I was very struck by something Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent, said yesterday to Bob Schieffer, which was, when did you know, or how did you react when Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby, which was Sunday, which would have been yesterday, 50 years ago. And he said, well, we didn't know for hours and hours because we were busy in the motorcade escorting the president's body to Capitol Hill. No cell phones, no walkie-talkies, no communications once they left the hard lines at the White House.
Just shows you how different things were, just as Sandy said. And, you know, that's what Jackie Kennedy was so sensitive to, because when she did her famous TV tour of the White House, she said, I'm trying to change the way that the presidency is presented to the world. That's why I'm restoring the White House. That's why welcoming ceremonies on the South grounds are different. That's why Air Force One looks different from the way it did under Eisenhower. So she was so sensitive to the impact that she could have if this was a ceremony that looked like Lincoln's funeral. It would elevate JFK to the level of Lincoln, but also it would replace those sordid images from Dallas.
And Sandra, you referred to the fact that it was John Kennedy's the 3rd birthday, and that image when he came down, and you see now we're showing the footage of Jackie Kennedy leaning down and suggesting to him that he salute his father as the coffin was passing. The backstory to that, according to Clint Hill, the head of her Secret Service detail, was that she had asked the detail to teach him how to salute in advance of going to Arlington for Veterans Day, November 11th, which he did with his dad, and that he kept using his left hand inappropriately, not the right hand, and that it was during the funeral in St. Matthews, Sandra, that a Marine lieutenant, at the request of the Secret Service, because the child was getting a little rambunctious and they were, practicing with him, taught him properly how to do a salute. And then, of course, he did it at her suggestion perfectly. Sandra, if you can think back to that image, it's imprinted in all of our hearts and minds, but when you saw it for the first time in real time?
Well, I saw it, but as you pointed out, television was not that old. It had been brought to this country from England in 1939. The famed essayist from the New Yorker magazine, E.B. White, said it had the potential to become the Chautauqua of the air, Chautauqua being an area near Lake Erie in upstate New York where great lectures were held. And so it was almost like central casting had designed Mrs. Kennedy and those 2 children to be front and center for the coverage after the assassination.
And I think the most memorable words that day spoken were by our own late colleague David Brinkley at the end of the coverage of the funeral. Let's watch David Brinkley summarizing it.
More than any other one person, it was she who raised the level of it all from savage insanity up to the level of solemn grandeur. Maybe no one will ever know how she did it, how she found the strength and self-control to do it, but she did. Everyone who has lived through all of this will remember these days and will remember what happened, and certainly will remember her.
And the other memorable moment, there were so many, but Mike Mansfield, then the majority leader in the Senate, wanted to play the audio of his eulogy to Jack Kennedy. He was reflecting poetically about that moment at Parkland Hospital the previous Friday when Jackie Kennedy had taken the ring off of her finger and put it on the finger of the slain president, her husband. Let's watch.
There was a father with a little boy and a little girl, and the joy of each in the other end. In a moment, it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a husband who asked much and gave much, and out of the giving and the asking wove with a woman what could not be broken in life, and in a moment it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands and kissed him and closed the lid of the coffin.
When you think of the eloquence of the majority leader there in the rotunda, Michael, that is what Jackie Kennedy aspired to, is having the nation remember her husband this way and creating really a different sense of the horror of what had happened.
Gave us back our self-respect. And, you know, British officials said to Americans after it was all over, she improvised this in basically 24, 48 hours. They said, we British, you know, we've been preparing for decades for Winston Churchill's funeral. You were able to do this almost instantly.
And she was 34 years old.
34 years old.
At the time, and John was turning 3 that day.
That day.
Thank you so much, Michael Beschloss, for all of your expertise and your wisdom. And Sandy Vanocur, it is great to see you again, and thanks for joining us from Santa Barbara, California. And this final note. President Kennedy's daughter, Caroline, is speaking out today for the first time on the 50th anniversary of her father's death. Caroline Kennedy, of course, the new ambassador to Japan, said in an exclusive interview published Sunday in a Japanese newspaper that people often tell her they were inspired by her father. She said that it serves as a reminder that we all have a duty to work together for a better world. Ambassador Kennedy also said, even though my father didn't live to accomplish all the things he wanted, his spirit lives on, a sentiment many share as we mark this anniversary.